Let me start by sharing my screen. Would be this one. So good afternoon. My name is Aikaterini Giampoura, and the topic of my talk today: corrupt politicians and fallen aristocrats, delivering justice by ridiculing power in a fairy tale world of children's radio. Derives from the children's radio show Liverpool, transmitted from December 1977 to May 1980 from the third program of the Greek state radio, when artistic director was the award-winning composer Manos Hatzidakis. The four scriptwriters, Eleni Vlachou, Regina Kapetanaki, Marianina Kriezi, and Anna Panagiotopoulou, were all young and progressive thinkers with notable studies in Greece and abroad. Liverpool can be perceived as a radio-theatrical adaptation of a fairy tale, consisting of fictional as well as realistic elements, forming an acoustic world where fantasy and reality mix together. According to Bausinger, the fairy tale does not derive its meaning from the fact that it is set apart from reality, but from the fact that it conveys something with its reality in a condensed, symbolic way. Liverpool captured very aptly and entertainingly the post-dictatorial era in Greece at the end of the 70s, a period of intense socio-political developments. Old comedy is a period of the ancient Greek comedy from 486 BC until around 400 BC, with Aristophanes as its most prominent writer. In old comedy, the aesthetically ugly and morally disgraceful was seen as laughable. According to Kakridis, what characterizes old comedy is the merciless vilification of contemporary politicians and other persons who stood out in Athenian society. The Athenian comic poet had the right to take on whomever he wished without fear of being dragged into court. The comic poets believed that controlling those who administrated the common and spiritual affairs of the state was not only their right, but also their duty. The mission of comedy, they said, was to aid in the welfare of the state by exposing all lawlessness and wickedness. Based on the assumption that serious things can be better understood by means of laughter, a stylistic method in the old comedy named spoudeogelion emerged. Aristophanes first showed the term in the Frogs. Και πολλά μεν γελία μεν υπήν πολλά δε σπουδαία, meaning, let me say many things in a funny and many in a serious way. Spoudeogelion, the mixing of serious and comic elements, was used for reforming and moral purposes. It exercised effective and genuine criticism of life, society, institutions, whether touching on literary, mythical, political, or professional matters. The social, critical, ridiculing, and ameliorative character of spoudeogelion are elements traced also in satire. According to many definitions, satire sharply ridicules public or private manners, the characters of people or circumstances. It has also the ability to change or improve persons or social conditions. It is not far removed from everyday social interaction and has usually the critical exposure of socio-political life as key function. Old comedy employs utopianism by combining acute social commentary and political interventions in the creation of alternative or imaginary self-standing worlds. Schmitz-Emmons argues that the fantasy world unfolds as a counter-proposal to provoke comparison with reality and the rules shaping it. The Greek folklorist Lucatos observes that in fairy tales, there is a conflict between good and evil, but good always wins. Ziderveld describes the communication process between the show's creators and listeners in the following formulation from 1968. Reality is translated into another reality, and the audience has to translate back the second reality into the first real reality. Liverpool was understood as a miniature of the Greek society. The audience, aware of the socio-political references through satirically conveyed allusions, compares them with its own reality. So Liverpool manifested two levels of humor, and for that reason appealed not only to children, but also to adults. These satirical allusions were integrated in Liverpool through parody and caricature. Parody is understood as an imitation of an older work, from where a new work emerges and whose form is externally preserved, while the inner meaning has changed. In Liverpool, persons, events, procedures, as well as the narrative genre of the fairy tale are parodied. A variety of human types have acquired the radio form as sound caricatures, with personality traits presented in a condensed and exaggerated manner. Some of them are the bourgeois singing snake Office Sophie, the resourceful and braggart scientist Dr. Rakator, the incredulous fisherman Visropopingas, the conservative lady Pipineza with her cheeky parrot, Snow White from the classical fairy tale together with her husband, the arrogant prince of the downfallen Tsitsirisburg dynasty, and lastly, the mayor Harhudas. Harhudas and the prince are involved in numerous scandals. Their illegal actions, frauds, and conspiracies are presented in the following list. Harhudas trades public property for his own benefit, as in the episodes entitled Pipineza is going abroad, or the big watermelon, sometime later, as you see here, the dates of transmission. He establishes the bribing week here in the staircase. He stages a coup at the radio station. This is an episode parody of the armed forces radio station that used to broadcast during the military dictatorship and later until 1982. He files political opponents and citizens. He cheats people with a religious scandal of a sacred whipping statue. And he steals the secret weapon of Lilliputpoli to sell it abroad. The prince, on the other hand, attempts the valuation of a historic building to exploit it for his own benefit, as in the episode Office Sophie and the 101 floors. He attempts also to take over the radio station of Lilliputpoli. Together, Harhudas grants ownership of the Moon Island to the prince and enthrones him secretly with the aim to abolish elections in Lilliputpoli. At some other point, they convert Lilliputpoli's castle into a palace and conspire to enthrone the prince. They establish a bank, which they try to rob afterwards. The robbery of a bank, however, by its own founders, implicates that the bankers are also the thieves of people's money. This can be considered as an indirect reference to Brecht's famous quote from the Threepenny Opera, "What is a breaking into a bank versus setting up a bank?" They establish an insurance company, and then they set traps all over Lilliputpoli to get people injured. They secretly exploit the means of production for personal profit. They prevent people from being benefited from scientific achievements so that their personal interests are not harmed, as in sabotage, for example. They cause a new Watergate in Lilliputpoli by wiretapping the phones and keeping citizens under surveillance. They cut Lilliputpoli into plots of land and try to sell them. In this list, we see the following indictable offenses based on real events and situations, such as violation of constitutional rights, abolition of the institution of parliamentary democracy, financial scandals, violation of freedoms, abuse of power, even committing national treason. In the sense of spoliation, these are extremely serious issues related to political and economic administration, but are presented in a laughable way so that not only the actions, but also their perpetrators are ridiculed and criticized. Music is also put in the service of satire. Harhudas and the prince have each their own song in the show, revealing their personality traits and thoughts. The March of Mayor Harhudas was originally used to introduce Harhudas to the listeners. The name Harhudas resonates with the Greek word Arkuda, meaning bear. The lyrics were modified to respond to a series of episodes under the topic Elections in Lilliputpoli, transmitted in December 1978. Let's hear it. The song begins with a simple musical phrase played by clarinet and xylophone, followed by a second one played by piccolo and flute. The impression given is of a playful childless song. Right after, brass instruments and snare drum are introduced, and the song makes a clear reference to military march music, building at the same time an association to formality and seriousness, indicated also by the minor scale of the song. Harhudas enters confidently, presenting his governance vision as the only political solution with him on top. In the second stanza, he encourages everyone to vote for him, the fluffy and chubby one, whose exuberant bear-like appearance shows off how well-lived he is. During this parody of elections, he does not announce a concrete political agenda. By presenting the Harhudian Republic as the only political solution for the future of Lilliputpoli, with himself as leader, Harhudas indicates authoritarian regimes of governance. This suggestion is intensified at the end of the second stanza by his selfish mantra, me, repeated 5 times, like a parody of an omnipotent ruler whose every word is dominated by his own voice. The song associates the general idea of the military through the music topos march with a politician of extremely conservative ideology, whose profile is rounded off with further linguistic elements, such as his use of language, as in the occasional use of katharevousa, the language of the scholars and conservatives, instead of dimotiki, the language of the common people, as seen in the first strophe, where the noun lysis, meaning solution, bears the archaic ending is, instead of C in its modern version, Lysi. I have it here written. In general, Harhudas' obsession with power, his authoritarian vision, his manner of speaking, the use of language, along with the music setting, presents the figure of Harhudas as a caricature of the military officer Georgios Papadopoulos, one of the Greek leading dictators during the military junta from 1967 to 1974. It's this guy I show you right now.
Ουδής εκ των πολιτικών αρχηγών ανελάμβανε να βοηθήσει τον ανώτατον άρχοντα ώστε.
In this sense, the march rhythm not only overemphasizes his words, but suits him really well, since marches were one of the preferred musical genres by the dictator Papadopoulos and the nationalist propaganda in general. This outburst of power-grabbing mania, supported stereotypically by march music, contrasts with the childishness and naivety of the song's opening. It sounds like a joke that mocks Harhudas. The Prince's song, Hey Ho, derives from Disney's 1937 animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Music wrote Frank Churchill and lyrics Larry Morey. On this melody, the show's lyricist Monenina Kriesi wrote new lyrics. Let's hear the Prince's version, first transmitted in April 1979.
Χαϊχώ, χαϊχώ, ο πρίγκιψ είμαι εγώ, που όλοι με ζηλεύουνε. Χαϊχώ, χαϊχώ, γιατί έχω εγώ και στυλ πριγκιπικό και τίτσονα τη σύζυγο. Χαϊχώ, χαϊχώ.
The prince brags about his aristocratic lifestyle. He shows off his wife Snow White, repeating that everyone envies him. The melody, however, in which he is conspicuously boasting about his supposed aristocratic greatness, although in march rhythm, along with the exclamation "hey ho," does not imply formality, but rather resembles a child's scout song. This incongruity results to ironic mocking of the flamboyant prince. According to Otardo, irony results when the maxim of manner is violated, that is, when there is incongruity between linguistic and paralinguistic utterances. In this sense, the non-verbal utterance, that is the trivial and mundane sound gesture of the hey-ho melody, subverts and invalidates the verbal meaning of the lyrics and implies the opposite of what the arrogant prince wants to convey. Obsessed with royal splendors and dreaming of thrones and crowns, the prince turns out to be small and laughable. Some further linguistic features intensify the mocking of the prince. The rotty consonant in his accent, the R, is uttered as voice alveolar fricative, as r, instead of voice alveolar tap, r, which is Greek sounding. The parody of his R accent phonetically suggests foreign origin. His persistence on becoming king in Lilliputpoli creates significant resentment among its inhabitants, since an outsider wants to rule over them. The prince at this point symbolizes all the foreign monarchs that reigned Greece since its official foundation in the 1830s. These monarchs, imposed by foreign powers, were ignorant to the land and its people, to its culture, and to its historical long-standing struggles for freedom and sovereignty. Verbal humor mocks the prince even further. The prince's family name, Tsitsirisburg, is a direct reference to the House of Glucksburg, a Danish-Germanic branch of the House of Oldenburg, whose members have reigned in Greece from 1863 until 1973. The name Tsitsirisburg is a word pan consisting of the Greek verb tsitsirizo, followed by the typical Germanic suffix berg. Tsitsirizo in Greek means to produce a continuous hissing sound like oil burning in a frying pan. Figuratively, it means to subject someone to a long-lasting discomfort. With the abolition of monarchy in Greece in 1974, the king and his royal family found themselves suddenly in a particularly unfavorable situation and were sizzled as undesirables by the Greek people. In this presentation, the sound caricatures of Harkoudas and the prince as symbols of power were judged and ridiculed not only for their actions, but also for their morals and intentions. The lawless actions of the two radio figures, in combination with their linguistic and paralinguistic elements in the songs, examined within the social, political, and historical context of the show, creates a caricaturistic depiction of Harkoudas and the prince. In the figure of Harkoudas, it is not only the Greek dictator Papadopoulos who is mocked, but also politicians in general. In the figure of the prince, not only the House of Glücksburg is being mocked, but also the institution of monarchy. The involvement of the palace in crucial political events of the country, as well as its close cooperation with conservative governments and the army, was mercilessly vilified. Through the social mirror of Lillipoupouli, people of influence in the political and economic life of the country that stood out in the Greek society, in an analogy to the old comedy, were ridiculed for their bigotry and corruption in the style of Spoudoielion. Behind the satirical view of Lillipoupouli lies idealism. Even though a parody of a fairy tale, in Lillipoupouli the principles of good and just have been preserved. No matter how hard Harkoudas and the prince try to carry out their self-serving plans, they never succeed. Thus, in the utopian world of Lillipoupouli and for the radio listener, this functions as symbolical justification. The creators of the radio show were given the freedom to express through humor and satire their opinions and present them in public. From their progressive ideological perspective, they dare to mock conservatism and political power and exercise critique on the current socio-political state of the country. On a wider social level, the ridiculing of Harkoudas and the prince mirrors the conflict between progressive and conservative forces in the Greek political scene at the end of the 70s. Thank you very much for your attention. And here's the reference list.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Katerina. That was great, coming in almost on exactly under 20 minutes. Perfect. Thanks so much. So we're going to hold off on the question until we've heard from Marie. And Marie, if you wouldn't mind. Hello.
Hi.
I've made you co-host, so you should be able to share your slides and sound, and then should work hopefully. If not, we can try that. Marie, is that okay if I introduce you now, and then we go to your presentation? We're going to try to share first.
Yeah. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Great. So I'm sorry I'm late. I'm had a bit of trouble.
Oh, no worries at all. So just a quick intro for Marie. Dr. Marie Caslin is a senior lecturer in childhood and disability studies at Liverpool Hope University, England. Since 2018, she has been working with an organization called the Comedy Trust to explore the role of laughter and humor in creating community cohesion and social change. Marie is presenting, as you can see, on behalf of a whole lot of people. I'm going to post those names in the chat so you can have a look. Marie, over to you, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. So it is just me representing a whole load of different people. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of a project that's in the very early stages. So I'd be very grateful of any thoughts, any suggestions, any comments on the work that we're hoping to do with our project. So we were thinking about how would we describe ourselves. So we've got a little slogan that we'd use to kind of sum up the work that we're doing. So we are a collective of comedians, academics, and grassroots organisations using humour-led techniques and conversations to kickstart action towards a fairer society. So our project is really looking at how we can use comedy for social change. I know that there's a lot of people doing work in this area, but we're hoping to kind of build on work that's previously been done and work specifically with the community. So looking at how comedy can be used to create community cohesion, so to address stigma and discrimination that's experienced by groups within our society who are othered. So there's projects that we're looking at that relate specifically to the lived experience of disabled people. We're looking at older migrants, young people. So there's a whole array of different people that we're working with on different projects, but I'm hoping you'll get a sense of what we're doing as I go through the presentation today. So what I'm going to talk to you about today then is just to provide a brief overview of how the partnership developed between the Comedy Trust and Liverpool Hope University. And then I'm going to hopefully give you a bit of an outline of the Comedy for Social Change research project. And I'm going to provide some examples of how we've used comedy within some of the shows that have taken place so far, but hopefully you'll get a sense of kind of how that's going to work as we go through the session today. But what we're looking to do is kind of think about how we can use comedy, humour, laughter to address some of the stigmas and discriminations that's impacted in our community, or experience within our community. Oh, I need to go back. Sorry, I've got I just need to go back a minute. I'm aware that my video looks like it's going a bit funny as well. I don't really know why.
Oh, you might want to just, might be the bandwidth, you might just want to turn off the video and turn it back on, or just, if it keeps doing that, you might just want to turn off the video and just present and we can see your slide.
Okay. Let me go back to this slide. So the slide that I'm showing you now, hopefully it will come up, is it's got a couple of images on, and this is to kind of talk to you a little bit about who the Comedy Trust is. So the Comedy Trust were established in 2002, and they do their kind of slogan is to create happier, healthier people through the platform of laughter and comedy, and they offer a wide range of comedy programs that's specifically located in the community of Liverpool. So it's quite northwest based. So we're based in Liverpool within England, and the Comedy Trust is a small charity organisation that works with different groups within the community. So there's a couple of images on the screen of some of the groups that they've worked with. So some of the images represent young people and looking at issues around mental health. I think
we can't see the slides at the moment. We can't see those. If you might want to reshare.
Yeah, will do.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was me. I didn't share again. Sorry. So can you see it now?
I think it's, yep, we can. Thank you.
Oh, right. So the images on the slide are of some of the comedy programs. So there's a couple of images that are young people taking part in comedy programs. So this is around young people's experiences of mental health, and it being a way to offer an opportunity for young people to talk about issues that they're experiencing. So what Comedy Trust do is they have a range of different programs, but an example of the type of program that they would do is a stand-up comedy program. So a group of young people would be given the opportunity to take part in a stand-up comedy course, which would run typically for 7 to 8 weeks. So each week the young people would meet and they'd explore kind of how they could use comedy to talk about their experiences and issues that are really important to them. And then at the end, what they do is they'd have a stand-up show where they perform a 2-3 minute routine of what they've been discussing in the sessions. And it doesn't have to be, they don't have to get up and use a microphone and do a stand-up comedy show. It could be that they represent it in a different way and using different comedy techniques. So it might be that they create a narrative or a story around it that draws on comedy but allows them to talk about their experiences and represent that in whatever way they feel comfortable. So one of the things that I think the Comedy Trust is really good at is being led by the people that they're working with and getting to know the group and what the group are going to be comfortable in terms of how they share their experience of working with the Comedy Trust. So they've worked with young people, they've worked with older men around mental health, they've worked with people with dementia, they've worked with bereaved families, they've worked with new mums and looking at the stuff around postnatal depression. So the the work that they do is very wide and very varied. And I'll move on to the next slide, which is kind of starts to talk a little bit about kind of how I got involved with the Comedy Trust. So a couple of years ago, I was asked to take part in a research project that was looking at cultural organisations and how they could evaluate the work that they were doing. So I'm an academic based at Liverpool Hope University, and I was partnered with the Comedy Trust on this project. And I just absolutely fell in love with the work that the Comedy Trust were doing. So the initial project that I was invited to take part in was looking at how do they evaluate the work that they do. One of the issues that they have is how do they know that they're having an impact on the people that they're working with, but how do they demonstrate that? And there's all issues around kind of what funders' expectations are. Because they're a small charity, they're very reliant on getting funding in, and then the funders want some sort of measurable way of kind of assessing the impact of the programme. They were using something called the SWEMWeb scale, which is a wellbeing scale. But what they found was quite often it would look like it had a negative impact because of the way that you have to score it. One of the things might be that the nature of the programme is to get people talking about things like around the mental health. So the young person might by the end feel more open to say, well, I'm actually really struggling with this. So it looked like it was having a negative impact, but what it was doing was actually doing its job. It was getting young people talking about the mental health experiences and the issues that they were encountering. So it's how do they capture the impact of the work that they're doing in a way that's meaningful. And it also, one of the issues is that it really jars with the work that they do in the Comedy Trust. So it's all about laughter, having fun, being silly, and then they hand the young people a piece of paper and they've got to rate themselves. And some of the questions that they're asked are things like, I feel useful. That's a really difficult question to ask a young person. How's a young person meant to respond to I feel useful? It could depend on the day. It could depend on what was going on outside their lives. So we were thinking about, are there more creative ways that we can capture the work that the Comedy Trust does? So what we did was we worked on co-producing a piece of research with young people, and through that we produced an animated video which kind of showcased the work that the young people have been doing. It gave the young people an opportunity to talk about the impact that taking part in the Comedy Trust programme had on them, and I just think it was more reflective of the young people because it was really led by them in terms of the messages that they wanted to share, and it's just much more accessible in terms of, it was obviously more expensive as well. So there were some issues with it, but we do have a video that's available if anybody wanted to have a little look at the video that was produced animation. I can share that with anybody who wants to look at it. So then the next project that I was working on with the Comedy Trust was we've called it accessible CVs, but it could be video CVs. So this project was looking at employability and young disabled people. So within the UK, only 5.1% of people with a learning difficulty are in employment. I still get really shocked when I hear that statistic. So 5.1% of people with a learning disability are in employment, and we just don't think that's right. So we think about how do we change that? And one of the biggest barriers for young disabled people is the recruitment process. So how inaccessible that was. So what the Comedy Trust worked with a group of young people then for the young people to make their own video CV, which showcases their expertise, their skills. So with that project, we're looking at, it's not about the young person gets to make a video CV, but the issue isn't the young person. The issue is the wider social structures and the fact that we don't have an equal society, and it's attitudes that we need to change. So through this project, we're looking at how can we use comedy to change people's attitudes towards young disabled people and look at developing more inclusive, accessible recruitment processes. So this kind of led to, so the work that I've been doing with the Comedy Trust, I just became very passionate about it. I think that it's really important work that they do. So what that led me to was to, this time last year, I had the opportunity to talk to the academics within my school. So I'm based within the School of Social Science, which really aligns with issues around social justice. So I talked to the other academics within the school, and said that I've been working with the Comedy Trust. I think their work is really great. I think there's potential for us to really build on this. Would anybody else be interested in taking part in a project that looks at how we use comedy for social change? And then I got people started to get on board, and so other academics became involved in the project. And that's kind of the work that we've been doing this year, is different academics with different interests in issues around social justice, discrimination, have now started to develop their own projects working with the Comedy Trust. So we've been really influenced by Chatto and Feldman's work around comedy and social change. I won't read out those quotes just because I know that there's quite a lot that I need to try and get through. But that's the position that what we're trying to do is use Chatto and Feldman's work on comedy and social change, and this idea that it has 4 influences on audiences. So we're trying to look at how we can use that within a community setting with the Comedy Trust programs that we're working on. So with the example of the CV project, so the video CV project, in the summer last year, we held an event where we invited, so young disabled people were there, and they were kind of a really key part of that event. And then we wanted to get employers, people who support young disabled people, so people from the government or local authority, people working within education, people working in job centres, anybody who has a role in ensuring that young people have employment opportunities, we invited to this event. But with this event, what we did was we wanted it to be, it was kind of compared by a comedian. So the comedian was kind of running the event, and we wanted to incorporate comedy in kind of in whatever way we could. It was potentially quite subtle in the way that we did it, but using this idea of how we can use comedy to increase attention. So we used it to increase the attention towards the issue of the recruitment processes. And so the young people who made the video CVs then showed the video CVs at this event. And there were people who have never heard of video CVs who thought it was a really great idea. So it definitely brought attention to thinking about how you could do recruitment differently and potentially more inclusively and more accessibly to address the barriers that are experienced by young disabled people. Then we had this idea of disarming audiences. So one of the things that we're really keen to do is looking at how we might use games in particular at dissemination events to disarm, to kind of, yeah, as a way to disarm the audience and to lower the resistance to kind of the messages that we want to convey to them. So one of the things that we did was we played a game of higher or lower, and it was around statistics to do with young disabled people and employment. So we did it with the message coming across through a game, and within that the comedian had a role then in kind of making jokes and interacting with the audience throughout that game. But the messages that we were trying to get across were really serious in terms of shocking people at the very low statistics around employment rates for disabled young people. And breaking down barriers in terms of how that worked is that we had a game of snakes and ladders, so people were placed on a table of a mixture of young people and then adults who have a role in supporting young people, and they played a game of snakes and ladders together, with the ladders being the opportunities that young disabled people need to get into employment, and the snakes being what could be the barriers. So during that game, what was really powerful was that the young people were able to talk to the adults who have that role in supporting them about the issues that they encounter. And voice is really important to us, and lived experience is very, very important to us. So hopefully what that did was then challenge some of the stereotypes and assumptions that people might make around disabled people's capabilities. And then stimulating and sharing discussion is just having the space to talk about the issues. And I know that in the Chatto and Feldman book, we talk quite a lot about the role of social media, and that's something that I think we still really need to explore. So a lot of our events have been in-person events, but I think we need to kind of think about how we share the work via social media as well. So that was how we shared the video CV project with young disabled people. Then what's happened over
Marie, you've got 5 minutes left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this year we held an event which was the Comedy for Social Change event, which was looking at inviting anybody who had an interest. It was open to anybody who had an interest in comedy. And we talked about our different projects, so it was all of us involved in that. And then we did kind of little tasters of the different projects that are taking place under this banner of Comedy for Social Change. So I'll just, because I've got 5 minutes left, I just want to quickly talk to you about the other projects that are happening. Oh, so this Crip or Crap, sorry, this is another game that we played, which is looking at disability humour versus disabling humour. And I have to give all credit to my colleague Laura, who developed this game. So it's something that we play with students who are studying disability studies. And what we do is we show them clips of comedians, and then it stimulates a discussion around, is it okay to laugh at this? So it's all based on, based around disability, but there's being a difference between a disabled comedian talking about their experiences and what would be disabling comedy. So that would be the crap, so where it's kind of reinforcing discrimination, stigma, stereotype, and really problematic in the portrayal of what it means to be disabled, whereas Crip is a more positive representation of disability. So then the other kind of projects that are taking place as part of the Comedy for Social Change is Laura Waite is working on one called Downright Hilarious, which is working with a group of women with Down syndrome. And they've had their show just before Christmas, which was challenging the assumptions and stereotypes of what it means to live with Down syndrome, but to have Down syndrome. And potentially one of the ways in which that might engage audiences is thinking about how Down syndrome is portrayed, particularly when babies are first born, and how that tends to be quite negative in terms of it would be when the doctor goes in and talks to the parents, it's I'm very sorry to tell you. So it's even the way it's talked about from the very beginning is quite negative. So we were thinking about how we could change what it means to have Down syndrome and take it into a more positive way of engaging with that. And then Humorous Hopefuls are a group. So at Liverpool Hope University, we have a service user group, which is made up of an array of different people who have lived experience. So mental health survivors, people who have survived stuff around addiction, homelessness. And so their show it's how they talk about lived experience and working with professionals and changing some of the attitudes around the issues that they might have experienced. And then Outside Not is my colleague Simona, who's working on projects that look at the experiences of Italian migrants coming over to the UK. Am I out of time? Is that okay?
Oh, you've got 2 more minutes left if you like.
Okay, so that what I've tried to, I feel like I've tried to get through a lot and I've thrown a lot at you. So it's just to kind of give you a sense of the type of work that we're doing. So what we're trying to do is looking at the role of comedy in highlighting issues that are experienced by groups within society who experience discrimination and stigma. And we are still at the very early stages of this. But what we think is that there's so much potential in this, and the humour opens the door to conversations is a quote from one of the young people who took part in the Comedy Trust programme, because we were thinking about why humour and laughter are seen as being particularly important. And it is within a context of the quite a poor education system, I think, which doesn't have enough space for creative subjects. And one of the other issues that we've experienced is within the context of the UK education system is that there's not much opportunity for young people to laugh and have fun and be silly. And quite often if you do laugh and have fun and be silly, it actually leads to you being punished. So we're thinking about how can we use it in a way that is more positive. And it's just this idea that it's very important that young people have the opportunity, but that everybody has the opportunity to laugh and be silly and have fun.
Perfect. Well said. Marie, thanks so much for your presentation. Let's please all give it up for Marie. And if you might just stop the share and turn back on your camera so we can see you and Katerina for the questions. And I'm just going to throw it over to the audience, but beforehand, I might just say thanks to both of you. And I think this conference being entitled Humour as a Human Right. And I think that has become very clear, at least to me, thinking about, as Alberta was talking about in the keynote, as Katerina, singing humour to power. I think now Marie's pointed out, it's all about a human right to fun, to laughter. And, it's just really interesting, I think, and I agree with Marie and Katerina that there's so much, and Roberta, there's so much potential there to explore that legal, that social, that creative right to humour and funniness. So yeah, I have got a lot of questions, but I might just open the floor to the audience. If you might just ask your question, yeah, and have a go, and please raise your hand and I get to you, and then we have about 15 minutes, 20 left for questions. Any questions? Mark.
Aikaterini, thank you very much for your paper. I enjoyed it. I'm just wondering how closely the program corresponded to Greek politics, in particular the giants of Greek politics of the late 70s and 80s, Papandreou and Karamanlis, and their respective parties, or was, and also if there is any correspondence, were the writers and actors supporters of PASOK?
Well, thank you for your questions. Well, this radio show was transmitted right after, let's say, a few years after the fall of the military junta. So Papandreou was elected after the end of this show in 1982, and the show ended at 1980. In the spring of 1980. So, of course, he was a known politician, but he wasn't one of the main characters that were caricatured in the show or parodied in the show. Mainly, what the creators of the show, I don't know their actual political preferences. I mean, I don't know what party they voted, but what we know about them is that they had a progressive. They were progressives. They were in the direction of the leftist ideological field. They were progressives, and what they wanted to do was to satirize some power in general. What their aim at first, and this is what the creators told me, was to satirize, to show that power was not a good thing. I mean, if you have great power in your hands, probably you won't use it for a good cause. So what in Liverpool was the main result of all episodes that were referring to these two politicians, let's say the Harhoudas, who was the mayor, and the prince, who was some other kind of powerful person, was to show that these politicians, of course, they were satirizing politicians of particular ideological perspectives, that is, conservatives, dictators, people who wanted to rule without taking into consideration the will of the people. I mean, people who wanted to have power to use for their own benefit. So this kind of power was mainly satirized in Lilliputpoli, and let's take into consideration that people were, the creators were slowly coming out of this dictatorial regime, and Greece was slowly trying to there was the feeling of the return of freedom of expression, slowly, that was back to the society. That means, of course, there were restrictions. Of course, there were still people in a very specific and important place in the governmental positions that were belong to the old conservative government and they were trying to, let's say, impose a type of censorship to the show. Of course, the show, and that's why I mentioned the artistic director there, Manos Hatzidakis, who during that time was a friend of Karamanlis. Manos Hatzidakis was a very close friend to Karamanlis. Of course, he had the support of Karamanlis, but Manos Hatzidakis managed to let's say, make the third program autonomous financially and in terms of running the radio station. He had the support, but he was free. He has the support of Karamanlis because they were close friends. So he had, let's say, the security to do whatever he wanted, in not by abusing financial means or taking advantage of the financial means. Let's say that they were that they were given to the radio station, but in order to create a radio program that was very progressive in comparison to the older form of the third program. He was friend of the government.
Sorry, Katerina,
sorry, what?
I'm so sorry. Just because I'm looking at the time, maybe just could you wrap up the answer so we can just maybe get another question?
Yes, of course. Yes,
sorry
yes.
for that.
So sorry about that. I will wrap up. So he was friend. He had the support of the government, of the Karamanlis, but he was able to create something completely different from the previous conservative form of the third program. I don't know if I've answered.
Sure, yeah. It sounds as though they would...
A bit, yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Questions for Marie? Any questions for the Commentary Trust? If not, I have one about, let's see. I might just go then, and if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. Marie, I was wondering, and again, this goes to what we heard from Alberto before, and Katerina now as well. So you're saying, I guess, that your charity or that the Comedy Trust is doing this amazing work, and I'm very sorry that we do not have Jackie Brady with us. They are amazingly, like, an advocate for that work. So I was just wondering, where do you see, like, where does humour research fit in there? Like, what can we do, like, as humour researchers to really support disability, visibility, humour as a literal human right? Do you think it should be part of the Constitution? That in some constitutions, human dignity is a right, the constitutional right. So you as a disability lecturer, like, humour as a human right, where do you see the future in that, and how can humour research help you out there?
Yeah, that's a really nice point. Thanks, Ben. I think one of the things that we are very mindful of is how humour has been used as a weapon as well to discriminate. So the way that we're coming at it is very much around social justice, social change, how humour can challenge some of the stereotypes and stigmas. But what's really important is that we're led by people who've got lived experience, and that's what the difference is when we're thinking about disabling disability humour, is that it's people with the lived experience that are the comedians that are talking about their experiences. In terms of thinking about in relation to research, one of the things that I'm really kind of keen to explore is how the background to my research is all around voice, and particularly young people who've been excluded from education, who are kind of making sure that their voices are heard. What I'm really interested in exploring is how you could use comedy in co-production. So when we're academics, comedians, but when we're working with people with lived experience, how we make sure that everybody's voices are heard, and how humour can be really important in that, in terms of breaking down barriers, in terms of developing trust and relationships with people. And it's part of you'd want to see it in kind of everyday practice. And humour is just really important, isn't it? And it's kind of something that's, I think, is present a lot. I know that I use it a lot in teaching. So when I'm talking to students about a particular issue, what I'll try and do is put in a little anecdote or a personal story. And when I'm doing that, I try and relate it to humour in some way. I don't know if that answers I think comedy and co-production is something that I'd be really, really keen to explore. And I don't know if there's been much that's been written, or if anybody's got any suggestions of things that they think would be good for me to look at. That would be great.
And if you don't mind, please post any links or any suggestions in the chat, and we also have the opportunity to then put your contact details up later after the conference. You get in touch. We're almost out of time. Let me just thank Katerina. Katerina, I would be sure to use the song that you played in my classes, because I think it's a great segue to Team America and some other stuff that I'm teaching at the moment. So really, thanks so much for that. Again, Singing Truth or Humour to Power, and Marie, fantastic presentation on the Comedy Trust. Really thanks to you both for being here and coming all the way from Europe into our Zoom here. We're having a short break now, 30 minutes, and then we've got the last panel of the day on with Dennis, who's already in the chat. Yep. And great. All right. I'll see you in 30 minutes. Thanks again, Katerina, and Marie, please give it up. Thanks so much.
Oh, you've got it under him.